How well is Florida State recruiting against its rivals like Florida and Miami?
You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Seminoles. I am your host, Brian Smith. Thank you for subscribing to this channel and hitting that notification bell and that like button. And please share this podcast whenever you can. This is a lot of fun for me, and we are definitely in the thick of the recruiting race. Got another commitment tonight from Tavon Wallace. Going to talk about him in a few minutes. But the overarching theme for today's show is, where does Florida State stand as it relates to recruiting against its rivals? I'm going to talk about the recruiting classes for the Noles, for the Canes, and for the Gators. In a little bit of context, I'm going to talk about some of the other schools that Florida State primarily recruits against. Mention Clemson, Ohio State, Bama, Georgia, some of that stuff. But again, primarily the focal point of everything else today, the in-state recruiting battles and where it stands. There's a few kids for each school that they've got a chance to get in the next few days. All these teams should go on runs, I would think, in early July. If they don't, there's something wrong. But this is fun for me. So let's dig into that. But today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wind down and sports start to kind of wind down with it. That's all right, because remember, this summer, FanDuel is hooking you up with a boost or a bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everyone each and every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. Let's just use Tavon Wallace as an example. Florida State is after this young man. He's out of Jessup, Georgia, Wayne County. It's a really good program in Southeast Georgia. They take a lot of pride in it. And here are his rankings. I'll just put things in complete perspective. He's number 57 overall on the On3 composite. On3 has him as the 44th best player, the third best linebacker, seventh best player in the state of Georgia. 247 has him 36, 3-8. ESPN 37, 4-8. And Rivals has him 179, 12, and 19. So they're all pretty high on him. He's a consensus 4-star elite prospect. But this is something that Florida State has tried to do for as long as I've followed recruiting, and that's hit South Georgia. I harp on it on this show a lot, and this staff has done a great job. Not a good job, a great job. Turning over every rock, etc., and not only recruiting the best players, but recruiting the ones that they personally like to fit their scheme. So what does the film show? This is an elite prospect that can take your class into the top 10 right now, for what it's worth. On3 has Florida State's class 10th. I'll explain some of the rankings here in a second. Elite prospects like this change your class. Florida State needs linebackers. They're a little thin there from the high school ranks over the last few years. They haven't hit on it as much as they probably need to. But this class is trending in the right direction, and Wallace is another opportunity. If you get kids over Georgia, if you get kids over the Alabamas and Auburns and stuff right in the middle of Georgia, south and south, or in south central Georgia, you're doing the right things. Wallace is one of two or three guys that can pretty much pick his school. I don't know for sure what's gone on in the last, say, 24 hours or so, but everybody seemed to have Florida State as the team to beat going into this, but it's been pretty quiet from everything I can tell from talking to people in the last 48 hours. That's typical with recruits this time of year. They want to have their own little happiness and announce for who they're going to pick, and that's that. Fair enough. But this is the kind of guy that Florida State right now is doing better with, by and large, than what Miami and Florida are, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So here are the rankings for the teams that Florida State competes with the most. Florida State, right now, these are all On3 rankings for the teams. 10th, Florida is 46th. Miami is 16th. Some of the other teams you commonly hear the Seminoles going against. LSU right now is 3rd. Bama is 2nd. Georgia is 4th. No surprises there. Auburn's having a pretty good class. They're 12th. Clemson, no shock, 6th. And Ohio State is number 1. Those are a lot of the schools they go against. So it's not a real shocking list other than Florida. Like, we'll get into a little more of that here in a second. I'm going to go down Florida State's list in their class. But Florida is the only one out of those tradition schools that's struggling. Why? It's because Napier's on the hot seat. Again, I will go into detail on that here in a second. But I just want to kind of talk about Florida State's class overall. And if they get Tavon Wallace tonight, he announces at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. That would be a nice boost. It would probably take them up another notch or two in the rankings. So who does Florida State have? Why do I like their class? What do I think about it in terms of just generic overview? Number one, you got arguably the best interior offensive line recruit in the country committed. And he shut down his recruitment. That's Solomon Thomas from Rains High School in Jacksonville. He is a dude. Chance to play pretty early. I don't like freshmen playing on the offensive line, but it's not out of the question that he could do it. Very special player. If there's a kid that plays with more effort than Javion Hilson on the edge, I don't know who it is. I think he's a kid that's a 4 or 5 star prospect. On a bad day, he's a 4-star. But like Rivals and On Three and all these schools or all these different services, they like him too. It's very consistent. Everybody has him top 100. Right now, Rivals has him as the 19th best player, which once they go into the 5-star system, that's where he would be. I think he's a player that could play very early at Florida State. It's another spot they haven't done very well in the high school ranks recently. Elite prospect and great kid too. CJ Wiley, he's the one we talked about a few days ago. Georgia really wanted him. They don't normally lose out on in-state kids that they prioritize. Congrats to Florida State. They pulled the recruiting shocker. I did a podcast on that here on Locked On Seminoles a few days back. Big-time receiver, 6'4", need that size. And they got their boundary receiver. Again, this is 3 years in a row they've gotten a bigger-bodied receiver. So good job by the Noles in that regard. They just got Myron Charles, and they just got Kevin Wynn in the last week. I was concerned about defensive tackle recruiting, then boom. They get 2 kids that they had in for official visits in June. The plan to backload the visits, it's paying off. It was a little slow action, but that helps. They also just got Chase Lofton, the tight end, out of Nebraska, which is just really random for Florida State to get a kid from there. But really good receiving threat. Needs to get a little bigger to help be in the blocking game, but he's got tremendous hands, great feet. Lofton's the kind of guy that can be a threat in the passing game very early in his career. Greg Thomas, we call him Zay, one of the most underrated corners in the country. I think he's a top 150 kid. Some of the other people don't have him ranked as high, but he plays at American Heritage. Sertan wants him. That also gives me faith that I'm making a good evaluation there. I think he can play early at most schools. At Florida State, I think he'll challenge for playing time as a sophomore, but the secondary is deep. So he's going to have a lot of guys to battle with, but that's why you come to Florida State. You want to have an opportunity to be on a great team, you got to compete with other great players. Tramel Jones, the quarterback that Florida was trying to flip, has shut down his recruitment. He is a Nole. He is at Mandarin High School in Jacksonville. So the Noles do have a quarterback in their class. Then a kid that not enough people talk about, Ethan Pritchard, the linebacker at a Seminole High School just north of Orlando. Really, really twitchy kid. I've known about him since he was a freshman in high school. This is the kind of player that Bowden always signed. I love these kind of guys. Don't get the love they should, but can really run. In-state kid, wanted to be at Florida State, committed early. Ethan Pritchard can play. I think that he will end up being a starter at Florida State at some point in his career. So overall, that's kind of where I see Florida State. It's got a nice balanced mix. Just need more offensive linemen and stuff just to fill it out, which is typical. They're waiting on a lot of kids to decide this month and into the early part of the season. Do I think Florida State is going to have a top 10 class? Probably. Right now, they're on the cusp of it. There's no reason to think that they won't. But again, this show is about how are they doing against the other teams. Miami, Florida, we'll talk a little bit again about some of the national and what that means. But I think Florida State is ahead of the curve, and we're going to talk about that next on Locked On Seminoles. I love sports, and I know you do too, and we never really want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down and there are fewer opportunities with games, sports aren't quite as busy as they want them to, or as we want them to be in July. But FanDuel lets everyone keep the sports going whenever one wants. All you have to do is open up the app and come up with bets at any time when you're in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all its customers with a booster bonus every day. That's right. There's something for everyone each and every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked-on and get started by making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So what is going on with Florida recruiting? The short answer is the one that's right in front of your nose. Billy Napier's on the hot seat. It's the same thing I've said on this show forever. And I actually had somebody tell me that a recruit recently sat down with Napier when he was on an unofficial visit and was like, hey, what's the deal? Where do things stand? 2 points on this. Number one, I give the kid credit. I'll leave names out here. But at the same time, what's Billy going to say? I'm getting fired? Either you believe he's going to be there or not. It is 100% gut. Name a time an AD has ever said before a season at a major program, Florida, USC, Texas, something like that. More than likely, we're going to fire the head coach after this season. Of course not. They're not going to, even if they just know there's hardly any chance they're going to keep a coach, that's just the way it is. There's nothing that the administration at any school, it's not a UF situation, can do to help that. That is the albatross. I've had kids unsolicited to me when I visited with somebody earlier this spring. This is wild. Bring up, why would I go to Florida? He's going to get fired. I was like, wow, that's pretty random. I don't know if I'll ever have that happen again, but that puts things in perspective. Florida's gotten a ton of kids to come to campus unofficially, officially, etc. They're having a hard time closing because kids are struggling to figure out whether or not he's going to be there. And to be honest, it's hard to say. For those of you who haven't seen, and I'm sure most have, UF's football schedule this fall is dumb. If you really want entertainment, go look at their final 5 to 7 games. Good luck. It is brutal. So even though they open with Miami and they could get a little momentum after that, if they were to win that, the back half is going to be rough and they're not going to beat Georgia. So they're going to be in a struggle bus. Florida State, Miami, all these other schools are kind of taking advantage of it. But I will go through their class. It's not like they have bad players committed. It's just not enough of them. And I'm not sitting here looking at the list and I'm like, okay, I know of a couple kids they're about to get. I'll leave that alone so they can have their own announcements. But they're not getting the elite players that I'm accustomed to seeing UF get, just historically speaking. Even Spurrier, who did not like recruiting very much, had a much easier time just because everybody knew he was secure in his job. He wanted to, he was a pain in the butt, but guys wanted to play for him. Wasn't that hard? Now, I don't know what people think of Napier in general, but it's pretty wild. The only good news I can think of, and this is one I still think Florida State will work on, prove me wrong. They did get Jalen Wiggins to say that he's shutting down his recruitment. He's going to stick with him. He's from Tallahassee. I said it a million times. I'll say it again. If Florida State loses out on Wiggins, that is an albatross. That cannot happen. He's from your hometown. Cannot lose him to your arch rival. Good job by UF staff there, but we'll see. Joshua Moore, receiver, big body kid, really good player. I thought at one point he's going to go to Florida State. It was really close. Florida won that battle over the Noles. Hats off to him. Miami, I believe, came in third. He's another big-bodied receiver, really good player, but obviously FSU got their big-body guy too. So 1-for-1 for each school. Moore's a good player, though. Waltez Clark, running back out of Tampa. He actually was an edge rusher at one point. He's a bigger back, probably about 210 pounds. I really like him as a player, downhill runner. He'll fit Napier's scheme, but I don't think he's a game changer necessarily. He's just a very good football player. SEC, you need a lot of those, but they still don't have a dude back there yet. The McLeod kid is interesting. One of the D tackles they got. Big-bodied kid, 280, but he lives just outside of Tallahassee, and I don't think Florida State really went after him. I could be wrong, but I have not heard that. I find that interesting. He's got a lot of upside because he's 280 plus, but I don't think he's an early impact guy. Micah Jones, kid out of Mississippi, I think they found a steal there. Good for Florida. Talented player, but again, it's a tight end. Chad Gasper, good running back out of Katy, Texas. That's basically Houston. Tayshawn Gelsey, a big-bodied receiver that's going to be transitioning into more of a tight end role. He's from the greater Jacksonville area. He plays at Riverside High, and then they got a punter out of Maine, which is kind of random. But where are the elite offensive linemen? They need an offensive lineman desperately. Where are they at? Did you fill your needs? Now, I like Wiggins. I like Moore. I like Clark. I like a lot of these guys. But did you fill your needs? They don't have a quarterback. They don't have an offensive lineman. They don't have an upper-level defensive tackle. Wiggins could probably grow into, and he's really good. But where are these studs at? Again, I think it's a problem because of Napier. I don't think it's fixable. The only thing they can do is wait till the season, try to survive the storm. Then you kind of start over. Because if you start 4-5-0, like you surprise a couple of people, then you could do something with recruiting. Too many kids are worried about whether or not UF staff is going to be there. Prove me wrong. Again, there's a couple kids I know they're going to get over the next few weeks, barring something changing with the commitment dates, but they're not getting anybody that's a game changer, to my knowledge, to commit anytime soon. This Florida class is underwhelming, and I think it is a direct result of what's going on with Napier. Do they finish in the top 25 if Napier saves his job? That's how low I would put the bar. I would think they would pass it, because if he saves his job, they surely get a few kids down the stretch, right? It's Florida. But at this point, I'm not sure. Everybody's coming after them, and I'm sure the negative recruiting is horrendous. Hey, he's not going to be there. Don't go there. You can see that a mile away. But Florida State and everybody else has just got an easy pickings deal with this because the UF job comes with the territory of being a pretty easy place to recruit, and right now it's just the opposite of that. This is rare. So Florida State needs to take advantage, and so far they have. But even now, Florida's won a couple of battles against them. We'll see if that lasts. That could change if things go south in Gainesville. You could see a couple kids flip from UF to Florida State in a heartbeat. It's not like Norvell is going anywhere. Now, one of the other things that I want to kind of put in perspective, I talk about defensive tackle recruiting all the time. UF's got Wiggins, who could play it, but I think he's a strong side end. He's 250, 255, and he's super athletic. He's one of the few guys at that size that could stick there, and they got one D tackle. Out of the schools I mentioned to start this, these are the kids that have defensive tackle recruits out of this list already in the fold. How many? Florida State's got 2. They're in great spot. Absolutely great spot. Florida's got 1. I'm a little concerned. Surprisingly, Miami has none. Bama has 2, one of which I'm not so sure they're going to keep. LSU doesn't have any. That is shocking. Like LSU recruiting is very, very weird. Out of this entire list, they have the weirdest class of anybody. Georgia, this is, even by their standards, ridiculous. They've got 2 kids committed. They've already got 4 players that weigh over 250, and they have a true nose guard, and they're probably going to get the 2 best defensive linemen in the country down the stretch on top of this. It's utterly ridiculous. They're going to have an all-time class again. Auburn has 2 D tackles. Clemson has 2 D tackles. And Ohio State just got their 2nd D tackle this week. So there's a lot of the prime schools are already done there. I'm curious if Florida State would take a 3rd, not only to bolster a position that's important, but to keep it away from UF, from a Miami, from a Georgia, whatever it is. If they would take, like if Justice Terry wants to come to Florida State, they're not going to get him. You take that commitment. But I think I would take a 3rd because Florida State had struggled, and I like the 2 kids they got. No question. Could never have enough big guys up front, man. You can't. And this is one of the reasons that the rankings, like on 3, the way they do their rankings is different. I know that like Florida State's ranked totally different by 24/7. It's like 36 because they just use a point system. So volume is really important. Well, that's not representative of what you've signed. Like a lot of the kids committed to like Rutgers and stuff, they're not going to help them really beat a Florida State in a bowl game. You know what I mean? So I like on 3 system a little better in that regard. So take it for what it's worth. But LSU not having it at D tackle, et cetera, that's really important. Florida State has made a jump. If nothing else on this class, they're already there with 2 guys, and they're 2 kids they've been on forever. Myron was a kid they recruited forever, and so was Wynn. Great job by the staff. I'm curious to see if they go after a 3rd. I honestly think I would because it's just so hard to find them. And when you get behind, you're in a small window of time to get somebody out of the portal you got to pay a ton for. It's easier to do it out of the high school ranks. Just my opinion. So next up, we're going to talk about Miami and then just kind of finish up with some general thoughts about recruiting, where things stand. It's a pretty unique scenario because like Miami doesn't have the big name kids committed yet, but all the guys are really after just backloaded on when they're going to decide. It's bizarre. Some of these kids, as usual, they're going to be battling Florida State. That's next here on Locked On Seminoles. Miami has a great recruiting staff. That is not in question. Mario works as hard as anybody. That is also not in question. But it's just weird because you never know what the timeline is going to be for your top prospects. Fair enough. For instance, DJ Pickett is going to announce in October. He can announce pretty much whenever he wants. Everybody knew who he was, and he was in 8th grade. I think he'll end up at Miami, but that doesn't help their class right now. Right now, again, Miami's class is 16th by on 3, and that's fine. Here's the problem with Miami's class. No D tackles, none, which they're trying to get a few, but they're struggling. They took 8 D linemen last year, so that's part of it. And where are the elite players? They got some really good players, and I think Gavin Nix, the kid they got yesterday, who Florida State would have loved to have had, is a really good player, and I think he'll be a multi-year starter at Miami. Really good. They don't have an elite player at number of positions, like offensive tackle. They don't have an elite player. I love the kid they just got, Max Buchanan at guard. Florida State would have taken him too. He can play guard or center, but he's not a tackle. They don't have a guy at corner yet that you go, okay, This kid's elite, although they have a chance, along with Florida State. Jabari Antoine, the corner out of Louisiana. I don't think he's going to end up at LSU from what I'm hearing. That's a really important LSU, Florida State, Miami battle. Like, how does LSU lose kids right down the street from their campus? It's amazing. But they're probably going to lose him, the best corner in the state of Louisiana, and that's LSU's arguably their biggest need. If Miami gets him or Florida State gets him, may determine who wins games down the road. Like, he is a difference maker at corner. You need players like that. That's an important guy to keep an eye on. Miami also, looking at their list, they're going big game hunting with the receiver. Miami and Florida State are committed to getting Dallas Wilson to flip him from Oregon. Depends on who you talk to, where you think he's going to go. Florida State's going to get him to visit at the end of the year for the UF game, the bye-bye Billy Napier game, quite possibly. I don't know what that kid's going to do. I give up. But I also know that Florida State and Miami, you have to put in the due diligence for a kid like this. 6'3", 200-pound receivers that can make guys miss after the catch do not grow on trees. He'll make contested catches. He'll make plays in the middle of the field. He understands how to work the back of the end line in the end zone. This is a very, very unique football player. So that's an important recruit that they're both battling. This is typical, really, right? Florida State and Miami always seem to battle. There's Byron Lewis, the running back out of South Florida at American Heritage. He's Zay Thomas's teammate. I think Florida State's the team to beat. I know some of the Miami people do, but I never count Miami out with South Florida kids if they want a bigger back in this class. So it's possible that they end up doing well with that. But let's just kind of go down their list here a little bit. All right, Gavin Nix, probably the best guy in their class. The linebacker they just got out of IMG, great kid, great family. He will play for Miami. Gerard Pringle, the running back out of Armwood in Tampa, probably underrated, to be honest with you. Very good feet, athletic kid, has the ability to play in the pass game or the run game. To put it in perspective how good he is in big game moments. Last year to open the season, Armwood went down to Venice and stomped a hole in them, and Pringle went for over 300 yards. You can do that against Venice, you're pretty darn good. Chris Ewald's the corner they just got over Georgia. He's a good player. I don't know if he's elite, but he's definitely a good player and a guy that could start. He's been on the recruiting scene since he was a freshman. That's a kid that can really run and change direction. Elijah Melendez looks like a professional boxer. He's so cut up. The only question with him, the linebacker out of Osceola in Kissimmee, Florida, can he stay healthy? He's been banged up a bunch the last couple of years. He's got to stay healthy. Brock Schott, the tight end that I really, really like out of the Fort Wayne, Indiana area, kind of like the Lofton kid that Florida State got. More of a receiver than a tight end. Very good player, though. He's certainly good. Amari Wallace is an undersized safety out of Central in Miami. He'll hit. He can really run. He's good in the back end. He's a very good player, but I don't know if you would call him elite. Gilbert is their big tight end out of the Cincinnati area, more of a power blocker. Buchanan's the center I mentioned a little bit ago. Luke Nickel is the quarterback. I like him better than most people do because he's just so accurate. He's out of Milton High School in Georgia. That's a kid that has been consistent in the big moments, so I give him credit. But he doesn't have a cannon for an arm. He's not an elite runner, but he is clutch. He took his team to the 7A state title in Georgia last year. That should be commended. Herbert Scroggins is a kid that they got that Auburn thought they were going to get. I saw Scroggins last year when I went to see Wood Tomahawk, ironically, because they play for the same high school in Savannah, Georgia. Benedictine Military School, athletic kid, 230 plus that can move. I think Miami's going to try to make him a pass rusher. Good prospect, but he still has a ways to go in terms of technique. Ezekiel Marcellin, good linebacker, but he's a little undersized. Timothy Merritt's a corner out of Birmingham, Alabama. I like him, but he needs more eye discipline, needs to be a little more consistent, but he's 6'1.5", 6'2". That's a big kid. Really great personality. Good luck to him, but he's far from a finished product. And then you get into their offensive linemen at the bottom. They've got three kids that have upside that are massive, but they're all raw. Demetrius Campbell, Takalen Mukes, and Jaden Wilkerson. These are all big kids that are over 300 pounds. None of them are anything more than three-star kids right now. We'll see where they go, but you got to give Alex Mirabal credit as a developer. We'll see. So, again, Miami doesn't have a D tackle, don't have a dominant quarterback. They don't have a pure offensive tackle that you're sure about, so they got a lot of guys backloaded. DJ Pickett and several other players, they're waiting on Epinesa, the kid from Illinois. They think they got a chance to get his brothers, of course, the defensive lineman for the Bills, that played at Iowa, and they got a family history going to Iowa. Good luck, but they think they got a shot. I just don't see as many elite players right now. and a bunch of their kids that they're after, they're just making decisions later. So it's hard to grade Miami's class. I give them credit for playing the long game. You got to have guts in recruiting. Bowden was the one that rolled the dice more than anybody when I was growing up, waiting for the kids that didn't want to decide until National Signing Day. Worked out for Florida State. We'll see if it does for Miami here. But right now their class is a little underwhelming with the elite talent, but there's several guys they're in on. To wrap up, a couple of things here about national recruiting. Between now and about this point next week, we will see a bunch of people commit all over. 3 stars, 4 stars, 5 stars, several of them on the July 4th holiday. Fair enough. It is going to be random. I cannot stress that enough. I know there are crystal balls and all that stuff, but even talking with some of my friends at Future 50 over the weekend, this stuff is hard because the NIL. Do not get suckered into just thinking so-and-so is a lock and fit in whatever school it is, etc. Some of these offers that kids get last moment change decisions. I know Oregon got a kid last minute about a week or so ago that they were nowhere near the leader for. They allegedly made a pretty big NIL offer. The kid doesn't go to Penn State. Those things happen. So don't be shocked at any decision you see for or against the school, Florida State or otherwise. Anything is possible in this area. It is really, really hard to predict. With that, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe, and share this podcast. If you have anything to say, please let me know and write down a comment on the YouTube channel. Be more than happy to comment back, and we'll have a little conversation. Going to start doing some previews with Florida State coming up, too, with some of the teams they play. We're finally to that point. We're almost to the ACC Media Days and all that stuff, so it's something to think about. Everybody have a great day, and thank you very much.